Hello, my name's Sam Inglis. I'm the editor-in-chief of Sound on Sound magazine. And one of the strange things about audio engineering is that the further up the food chain you get, the easier it becomes. If you're working with great bands in great studios, you get to use amazing equipment in brilliant sounding rooms on fantastic material. If you're just starting out, you get to work with limited equipment in bad sounding rooms with no money, no time, no resources, no support. And if you're just starting out, all too often you get to work with musicians who are on the same level as you are. Now, the first time you work with a professional musician, it can be a bit of a light bulb moment. You suddenly realise, oh, that's what a drum kit sounds like on record. That's what an acoustic guitar is meant to sound like. And you realise the sound comes from the player and their instrument, and that your job as engineer really is just not to screw it up. But if you're running a project studio or a local studio, your bread and butter is going to be local bands, and there the quality can be variable. And to me, the biggest challenge in recording is getting a good sound from bands that aren't at that pro level. Part of that is about managing expectations. Some musicians are only too aware of their own limitations, and they'll be absolutely thrilled just to hear themselves recorded at all. Other musicians are completely deluded and think they're going to come out with the next Steely Dan album after half a day in the studio. Some musicians are actually much better than they think they are, and the challenge is to overcome their lack of confidence. But either way, you need to go into the session without too many preconceptions, because you don't know what you're going to get. But once it starts, you need to make up your mind quickly and make an assessment as to what's going to be possible. If there really is a huge gulf between what the band actually sound like and what they sound like in their heads, you might even be better off saying, I'm not sure you're quite ready to record your classic album this morning. Maybe we should do some pre-production instead. So how do you get good results from an artist or band that doesn't have those years of high-level playing experience behind them? Well, for one thing, they're probably already quite nervous about going into the studio. So one thing you really shouldn't do is then suddenly ask them to change everything about the way they play. It's counterintuitive, but with bands who aren't all amazing musicians, you'll nearly always get better results recording the entire band live than you will by doing everything in pieces. One reason for that is just familiarity. They're almost certainly used to playing together in a rehearsal space. If you suddenly tell them they need to play their parts individually to a click with everyone else watching through the control room window, that can be a recipe for disaster. Likewise, if the band are used to hearing themselves live in a room and you suddenly make them monitor on headphones, that can really undermine their confidence. Yes, it might be easier from your point of view as the engineer to have everything isolated and played to a click, but that's totally the wrong way to think about it. These are your paying clients. It's your job to make life easy for them, not the other way round. And especially if your rhythm section isn't that great and you track them separately, the musicians who have to overdub to that rhythm section are going to find it really hard. Another reason for doing as much as possible live is just time. Even if you have to do 10 or 20 takes to get a good performance out of a band, you'll still have something to give them at the end of the day. Multiply that by every individual part and factor in the time necessary for time correction and pitch correction, and you're not going to have a very productive session. You're also going to have a lot of bored musicians on your hands. This is something they're paying for. It should be rewarding and fun, not tedious. In this sort of situation, one thing that can make a huge difference is having some really good sounding instruments and backline in your studio, because inexperienced musicians very often have guitars that aren't properly set up, or a drum kit they can't tune where they last changed the heads in 1974. The last thing you want to do is struggle for hours to get a good take out of them, only to have it ruined by a string that's gone out of tune or a snare that sounds like someone attacking Tupperware with a haddock. And whereas you can compromise a musician's performance by giving them an unfamiliar monitoring arrangement or asking them to use a click track, you can also inspire musicians to better performances by handing them an instrument that's better than what they're used to. When you're setting up, you can also try to anticipate problems that will arise further down the line. Take a DI from anything that you possibly can in case you need to do reamping later. Ask the drummer to record a few clean single hits on every drum in case you need to do some sample replacement. And most of all, trust your ears when it comes to things like timing and especially tuning. Just because someone has made all the green LEDs light up on the tuner does not mean they're going to play in tune. If the bass player twangs the strings really hard or the guitarist tries to throttle the neck of his instrument, they are going to be sharp. Make them tune like they play. When it comes to things like getting sounds and mic placement, there's a ton of great advice out there from well-known engineers. But most of that advice relates to working with professional musicians in professional studios. In the real world that most of us actually inhabit, those techniques aren't always applicable. If you've got a drummer who smashes the cymbals and barely tickles the hi-hat, you're probably not going to be able to use that clever mic placement or that modelled vintage compressor because it's just going to make the problem worse. You need to be able to think on your feet rather than just trotting out some formula you found on the internet. As an example, I once had a drummer in the studio who had a pretty normal 5-piece drum kit, but instead of arranging the drums in a semicircle like most drummers, he spread them all out in a long thin line. There's no manual on the internet that will tell you where to place the overhead mics for someone who has the hi-hat in a different postcode zone from the floor tom. And at other times you'll find guitarists or bassists can be inexplicably wedded to their signature tone, which invariably sounds like someone cutting up cardboard boxes with a cheese wire. And when you come across someone like that, I think it's usually best to let them get on with it, but try to sneak a DI box in ahead of the pedal board. That way they get to listen to the sound they know and they're expecting, and you get to work with the sound you want to at the mix. Something else that you quite often find with non-professional musicians is that skill levels can actually vary quite a lot even within a group, and you can often use that to your advantage. For instance, if the guitarist has a better sense of time than the drummer, maybe put lots of rhythm guitar in everyone's cue mix, or use the rhythm guitar as a timing reference when you do Beat Detective, or have the guitarist play the tambourine overdubs and not the drummer. Then you can mix the rhythm guitar louder than you normally would and maybe push the drums back a bit. However, there's one part that you can almost never get away with burying in the mix, and that's the lead vocal. Turning a lead vocal down doesn't hide the fact that someone can't sing. It just makes it sound as if they can't sing from further away. It's much better to treat an unorthodox lead vocal as a deliberate feature of your song. Mix it loud, mix it proud, put it front and centre. Getting good sounds from bad musicians is hard, and learning engineering is hard. But it's the people who are learning engineering who usually have to get good sounds from bad musicians. It's a bit like training to be a doctor by practicing on dead people. It's important not to let your clients have unrealistic expectations, but it's also important to manage your own expectations. Because in fact, there can be a lot of satisfaction to be had by taking a really unpromising situation and delivering something that's much better than it has any right to be, as my video editor knows all too well. Ultimately, engineering is something that you learn by doing, so next time you're sat in the control room trying not to wince as someone fails to hit a high C, don't think of it as a form of torture. Think of it as a learning experience, something that will make you a better engineer. And when the time finally comes and you get to record the LSO at Abbey Road, you'll be ready. In the meantime, the very best thing you can do to help that learning experience is to read Sound on Sound magazine, where you'll find all the latest product reviews, artist and producer interviews, and really helpful technique workshops. The new issue is out now in print, in PDF, in our new tablet edition, and it's available to read free online at soundonsound.com. Thanks for watching.